Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. In this talk, we will talk further on the sense sphere consciousness, the 54 Kamavachara cittani, and we will focus our attention on the Akusala cittani, the unwholesome or immoral consciousness. The 54 Kamavachara cittani, the sense sphere consciousness, is primarily divided into three subgroups: the 12 Akusala cittani, 12 unwholesome chittas, the 18 ahetuka cittani, or the 18 rootless chittas, and the 24 kamavachara sobana cittani, the 24 sense sphere beautiful chittas. The 12 akusala cittani, the 12 unwholesome consciousness, is further subdivided into three. There are 8 Moha-mula cittani, 8 consciousness rooted in greed, 2 Dosa-mula cittani, 2 consciousness rooted in hatred, and 2 Moha-mula cittani, 2 consciousness rooted in delusion. Let's refresh our minds about the roots once again. Roots are chetasika, they're mental factors. And these mental factors provide support to a consciousness and the other mental factors in the same way that the roots of a tree would provide support to the rest of the tree. Roots may be unwholesome or wholesome. And in the 12 akusala cittani, the 12 unwholesome consciousness, we would find unwholesome roots arising concomitantly with them. The three unwholesome roots are Lobha, Dosa, and Moha. Lobha refers to greed or attachment. Dosa refers to hatred or aversion. And Moha is ignorance or delusion. Now, if you look at this table, you would notice Moha under all three subgroups of Akusala cittani, which means that Moha is found in all 12 Akusala cittani. It is because of ignorance and delusion that one generates an Akusala citta, an unwholesome consciousness. Therefore, Moha can be found in all 12 Akusala cittani. The 8 Moha-mula cittani, or the 8 consciousness rooted in greed, have two roots. That is Moha and Lobha. And the 2 Dosa-mula cittani have Moha and Dosa as roots, whereas the 2 Moha-mula cittani only has Moha as a root. So, if a consciousness has roots, we refer to it as a sahetuka citta. Sahetuka. The prefix sa is added to hetuka when there are roots. And the 8 Moha-mula cittani and the 2 Dosa-mula cittani each have got 2 roots. Therefore, they are called dvi-hetuka. Dvi refers to 2. So they are called dvi-hetuka. And the 2 Moha-mula cittani each have got 1 root. Therefore, they are called eka-hetuka, which means 1 hetu or 1 root. Now, we spoke about the 8 Moha-mula cittani in our previous talk. Now we will move on to the 2 Dosa-mula cittani, the consciousness rooted in hatred. The first, Domanassa sahagatam, patiga sampayuktam, asankarikam, ekam. One consciousness accompanied by displeasure, associated with aversion, unprompted. And the second, Domanassa sahagatam, patiga sampayuktam, sasankarikam, ekam. One consciousness accompanied by displeasure, associated with aversion, prompted. Now, these are the two types of consciousness that are associated with aversion or rooted in hatred. Now, let's take a closer look at these. Both of these consciousness are domanassa sahagata. Both of these are patiga sampayukta. And where does the division lie? In whether they are prompted or not. So the first consciousness is asankarikam, which means it is unprompted. And the second is sasankarikam, which means it is prompted. Now, in our previous lesson, we spoke about the 8 Moha-mula cittani. And the 8 Moha-mula cittani was divided according to Vedana, the first principle of dichotomization, into 2 subgroups. Somanassa, meaning joy, upekka, meaning equanimity. But you would notice here, the 2 consciousness rooted in hatred are neither somanassa nor upekka, which means that every consciousness which is rooted in hatred will always have the Vedana or feeling of domanassa, of displeasure. One cannot have hatred with somanassa or upekka. It will always be domanassa, displeasure. Patiga sampayutta. What is patiga? Patiga refers to aversion, hatred, or ill will. It includes all degrees of aversion, ranging from violent rage to subtle irritation. The word patiga, it's a Pali word, and it means striking against. And what it really indicates here is that it is a mental attitude of resistance, rejection, or destruction towards the object. Domanassa, on the other hand, refers to the feeling. It refers to the sadness or displeasure or disappointment or grief, whereas patiga is the striking against, the mental attitude of resistance. And finally, the prompting. A consciousness rooted in hatred may occur spontaneously, which means it would be unprompted, or it could occur following prompting. The prompting could be from one's own self, from premeditation, or it could be by others. So, in a nutshell, what we spoke about here, the 2 Dosa-mula cittani are divided into 2 groups based on one principle of dichotomization, whether it is prompted or not. the feeling will always be domanassa. And the fact that it is associated with aversion is common to both types of consciousness. Let's now look at an example to understand this better. Let's take the example of one man murdering another. With hatred, one man murders another in a spontaneous fit of rage. This would be as a result of a domanassa sahagatam, patiga sampayuttam, asankarikam chitta. A consciousness that is accompanied by displeasure, domanassa, associated with patiga, aversion, unprompted, asankarikam, because it was a spontaneous act. But on the other hand, if this man murders another after premeditation, then it would be a sasankarikam chitta, a domanassa sahagatam, patiga sampayuttam, sasankarikam, a consciousness that is accompanied by displeasure, domanassa, patiga sampayuttam. It is associated with aversion, patiga. However, here it is prompted, sasankarikam. And those are the two types of Dosa-mula cittani. A few more examples. What if a person kills an animal for sport? Now you would think that when a person kills for sport, he's smiling and laughing while doing the act. He's enjoying himself. However, in whichever form, at the moment that a person kills another, there is aversion towards the object. And the object here that we refer to is jivitendriya, the life faculty. So the hatred or the dosa-mula cittani would have the life faculty or the jivitendriya of that particular living being as its object. So killing an animal for sport is also as a result of a dosa-mula chitta, one of the two dosa-mula chitta. It may be prompted or unprompted. How about killing a wounded animal with the objective of ending its suffering? Now, you would think that, well, the cause, the original intention is pure. How could there be hatred there? We've seen a lot of people take their old pets to the vet to be put down because they're sick and they're suffering. Yet, at the moment of putting that animal down, the consciousness at that moment of killing a wounded animal would be that of a dosa-mula chitta. Because once again, here the object of that consciousness would be the jivitendriya, the life faculty of that animal. So we do not want this animal to continue living, in other words, because it's suffering. So whatever the cause, that we do not want that animal to continue with its life, regardless of the cause. At the moment of killing, the consciousness which arises would be one of the two dosa-mula cittani. A scientist who performs vivisection. Vivisection is a practice of performing operations on live animals for the purpose of research or experimentation. Here, the intention is not really to harm the animal or to kill the animal, but it is in order to find a way of alleviating suffering, in order to find medication or certain operating techniques to cure certain illnesses. However, a scientist who performs vivisection knows that this animal is going to die as a result of the vivisection. Therefore, once again, here, the consciousness which would arise in this scientist would be that of a Dosa-mula chitta. Failing an examination. Now, would there be hatred when one fails an examination? Well, when one fails an examination, there is disappointment. There is aversion towards the object. And the object is the fact that one has failed an exam. There is sadness. There is a unpleasant feeling associated with that consciousness. So, yes, it is a subtle form of hatred. So, once again, the consciousness that arises at that point is a dosa-mula chitta. When one loses a loved one, when one grieves over the loss of a loved one, then again, the consciousness would be a dosa-mula chitta. Now let us look at the last category, the two Moha-mula cittani, the two consciousness rooted in delusion. And now, in this type of consciousness, we find only the root of moha. So it's a ekamula chitta. Now let's look at the two. The first, upekha sahagatam, vichikiccha sampayuktam, ekam. One consciousness accompanied by equanimity associated with doubt. The second, upekha sahagatam, uddacca sampayuktam, ekam. One consciousness accompanied by equanimity associated with restlessness. These are the two types of consciousness that are rooted in delusion. Well, let's take a closer look. The first word, upekha sahagatam, refers to the feeling that is associated, that is accompanied. Upekha refers to equanimity. It is a neutral feeling. Now, why are the two Moha-mula cittani accompanied by equanimity? Why cannot they be either somanassa, feeling happy or joy? Or why cannot it be accompanied by domanassa, an unpleasant feeling? Well, the reason is simply this. Both are upekha sahagata, because even if a desirable object is present when a moha-mula chitta arises, it will not experience somanassa, joy. Similarly, even if an undesirable object is present. The Moha-mula chitta will not experience domanassa, displeasure. This is because when a consciousness is associated with doubt, or when a consciousness is associated with restlessness, it is incapable of forming either a positive or negative evaluation of the object, and therefore it cannot be accompanied by either a pleasant or unpleasant feeling. For this reason, the two Moha-mula cittani have a neutral feeling, upekka, accompanying them. We would also notice that in these two consciousness, there is no mention of prompting. That is because both these two chittas occur naturally by their own intrinsic nature. They don't need to be prompted, they don't need to be aroused or induced. They always occur without any trouble, without any difficulty. Therefore, they are exclusively unprompted. When a consciousness is exclusively unprompted, there is no need to mention in particular by way of prompting, which is why these two consciousness are not referred to as prompted or not. They are exclusively unprompted consciousness. What is vichikiccha? Vichikiccha sampayutta, associated with doubt. Vichikiccha refers to doubt. And we will talk about the different types of doubt that may arise as the object of these kind of chitta. And the next, uddacha. Uddacha refers to restlessness. And when a consciousness is associated with restlessness, it is called uddacha sampayutta. We will now look at an example. The first consciousness is the vichikiccha sampayutta consciousness, the consciousness associated with doubt. A person, due to delusion, doubts the enlightenment of the Buddha, or he doubts the efficacy of the Dhamma as a way to deliverance. Now, in that person's consciousness would be a consciousness rooted in delusion, which is vichikiccha sampayutta, associated with doubt. The second, a person is so distracted in mind that he cannot focus his mind on any object. So being distracted, being unable to concentrate one's mind on a particular object, and that is when the uddacha sampayutta consciousness arises. Uddacha refers to being restless. It cannot focus its attention on a particular object. Vichikiccha, or doubt, skepticism, can occur in relation to 8 topics. The first 3 pertains to the Noble Triple Gem. If one doubts the Buddha or the enlightenment of the Buddha, one may doubt the Dhamma, the teachings that are present in the Dhamma, or the sangha. Sangha refers to the monastic order, the bhikkhus, the monks, and the bhikkhunis, the nuns. So if one doubts the society of the sangha, that too falls in as one of the 8 topics of vicikiccha. The fourth is in relation to the threefold training. Now, what is this threefold training? It is doubting whether the threefold training could lead to the final deliverance or nibbana. These include sila, samadhi, and panya. Sila is virtue. It refers to being restrained in body and speech, and thus preventing the occurrence of unwholesome bodily or verbal acts. Samadhi involves training of the mind and concentration, like developing jhanas. And panya is wisdom, where one would develop insight in order to penetrate the true nature of all conditioned phenomena, and also to understand the ultimate realities better, which finally would lead to nibbana, deliverance. The next 3, the fifth being doubts in relation to the past, and the 6th, doubts in relation to the future, and the 7th, doubts related to both the past and the future. Now, what it really means is doubting whether one had a past existence, whether one had a life before this present existence, a past life, a past bhava, or having doubts regarding the future. Is there life after death? Will I be born again? That kind of doubt. So these are the doubts in relation to the past and the future. And the final topic would be having a doubt regarding the paticca samuppada. Paticca samuppada is the law of dependent origination. This is the doctrine that describes the cause and effect relationship of all conditioned phenomena. And that concludes the description on the 12 Akusala cittani. Now, when we talk about Akusala cittani, we must always try to understand the 10 different kinds of Akusala Kamma, unwholesome acts. These 10 kinds of unwholesome Kamma, Akusala Kamma, can be described in relation to the 12 types of unwholesome Akusala cittani that we described before. But first we'll see what these 10 kinds of Akusala Kamma are. The 10 kinds of Akusala Kamma are threefold according to the doors of action. The doors of action are the body door, the verbal door, and the mental door, the mind door, which means that akusala or unwholesome karma can be generated either through the body door, the verbal door, that is through speech, or through a mental act, through thinking, by thought. So the first is called kaya kamma, bodily action or deeds. The second is vachi kamma, and that is verbal action or akusala generated through word or speech. And the final is manokamma, which is mental action or thought. Now, these three subgroups are what forms the 10 kinds of akusala kamma. There are 3 kinds of bodily action, or kaya kamma. First is panatipato, which means killing of another animal or a living being. The second refers to stealing, adinnadanam. And the third, kamesu michacharo, sexual misconduct. Those are the 3 kaya kamma, bodily action. And there are 4 vachi kamma, 4 verbal action. These are musavado, false speech, pisunavacha, slandering, parusavacha, harsh speech, sampappalapo, frivolous talk. Musavado, pisunavacha, parusavacha, and sampappalapo. These 4 types of speech form the 4 types of akusala vachi kamma, unwholesome verbal action. And there are 3 manokamma, mental action or thought. These are abhidja, covetousness, vyapado, ill will, miccha ditti, wrong view. Abhidja or covetousness is a form of greed where one would crave or desire to possess something which belongs to another. So you can have greed towards an object and not have abhidja or covetousness. Abhidja occurs only when one would crave for something that belongs to another. Vyapado. Vyapado is a form of aversion where one would desire harm or destruction of another individual or another being. So once again, one can be angry with another and not have vyapado. Vyapado occurs only if one desires the destruction or desires harm to another person. It is one could say, a severe form of aversion. And miccha ditti is what we described under the Loba-mula cittani, is wrong view. And miccha ditti is having a wrong view. For example, when a boy steals thinking that it's all right to steal from the rich, that is a wrong view. Stealing in whatever form is a wrong deed. But if he tries to justify it by saying it's okay to steal from the rich, now that is a wrong view. That is miccha ditti. And those are the 10 kinds of akusala kamma, the 10 unwholesome acts. Now, These 10 kinds of Akusala Kamma can be spoken of in relation to the 12 Akusala Chittani. And let's see how they happen. Let's take Panatipatu, killing, the first bodily action. Killing is exclusively done through one of the two Dosa-mula Chitta. One cannot kill as a result of a different kind of consciousness. It can't be something like a Loba-mula Chitta or a Moha-mula Chitta. It will always be as a result of one of the Dosa-mula Chittani, because there is aversion at all times of killing. Stealing, however, can be done either due to greed or hatred. One may steal from another because one desires that particular object, or one may steal in order to harm someone, in order to hurt someone. Therefore, adinnadanam, stealing, can be as a result of one of the 8 Loba-mula Chittani, or as a result of one of the 2 Dosa-mula Chittani. Kamesu michchacharu, sexual misconduct. This occurs as a result of one of the 8 Loba-mula Chittani, and there is no alternative to that. It will always be as a result of greed. And now let's look at the 4 types of verbal action. The first 2, musavado, false speech, pisunavacha, slandering, and sampappalapo, frivolous talk. These 3 types of speech could be as a result of either one of the 8 Loba-mula Chittani, or as a result of one of the 2 Dosa-mula Chittani. It could be either done due to greed or due to hatred. However, parusavacha, harsh speech, is exclusively done through one of the 2 Dosa-mula Chittani. There is always hatred, there is always aversion when one speaks harsh words. And now the 3 types of mental action: abhijja, vyapada, and micchaditti. Abhijja, covetousness, as I described before, is a form of greed. Therefore, abhijja occurs through one of the 8 Loba-mula Chittas. Vyapada is a form of aversion. Therefore, vyapada is always as a result of one of the 2 Dosa-mula Chittani. And micchaditti, wrong view. Micchaditti occurs as a result of one of the 4 dittigata sampayutta Loba-mula Chittani, one of the 4 consciousness associated with wrong view, rooted in greed. Now, if you recall, the 8 Loba-mula consciousness was divided into 2 groups based on whether it had ditti or not, whether it had wrong view or not. So when there is micchaditti, when there is wrong view, the consciousness has to be one of the 4 dittigata sampayutta, one of the 4 consciousness associated with ditti, with wrong view. In summary, we spoke about the 54 Kamavachara Chittani in brief and how they are subgrouped into three groups: the 12 Akusala Chittani, the immoral or unwholesome consciousness, the 18 Ahetuka Chittani, 18 rootless consciousness, and the 24 Kamavachara Sobhana, the 24 sense sphere beautiful consciousness. We then spoke about the 12 Akusala Chittani. There are 8 Moha-mula cittani, 8 consciousness rooted in greed, 2 Dosa-mula cittani, 2 consciousness rooted in hatred, and the 2 Moha-mula cittani, 2 consciousness rooted in delusion. We then described the Dosa-mula and the Moha-mula cittani, giving examples. And finally, we spoke about the 10 Akusala Kamma and how they are related to the 12 Akusala Chittani. In our next talk, we will discuss the 18 Ahetuka, the 18 rootless consciousness. May all beings be happy, be well, and free from suffering.